This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Welcome to combating elder abuse. This is something that should have been done, ladies and gentlemen, this being the symposium, that should have been done years ago, frankly, because this is a problem that has always been with us and is only beginning to get worse. Not because people are getting worse, but because we have more members of our population here in the United States that are aging. Everybody understands the phenomenon with the baby boomers and how we have people every day that are going into their 70s and 80s. We have more octogenarians right now than what we've probably ever had in the history of the world. And so we as government, we as private industry, we're going to have to start considering different options in terms of the way that we handle the challenges of an aging population. And I'll make one comment before I go any further. You know, I look out and I see all these empty seats, and, you know, it's unfortunate and it's a shame, but I'm not discouraged. One of the things that I do understand is that society, and by society, I don't just mean society at large, but I also mean governmental society, legal society, and I've got law enforcement officers here. The law enforcement society, we don't really yet fully appreciate the extent of the problem that we're faced with when it comes to elder abuse, financial exploitation, and all of the other horrible things that people do, elders and vulnerable adults. And I'm not going to talk very long because there's some experts here. I know a little bit about this, obviously, because I've been working on this for some years, but there's some people here that know a lot more than me. Jeanne Canavan is to my right. She's the deputy chief over our elder abuse unit, over our elder financial exploitation and white collar fraud unit. I was speaking with a young lady back there. I'm proud because in DeKalb County, as far as I am aware, I know we have the largest elder abuse financial exploitation unit, and we may have the only one in the state that's actually a unit with prosecutors that are just dedicated towards that. And you ask yourself why, and that's kind of what I want to tell you about now. About 5 years ago, I guess it's been 5 years ago, so it was 2007, yeah, about 5 years ago, I was initially elected as a public official in this county. At the point, I was Solicitor General, and there was another DA that both Matt and Jeanne worked for, and I had worked for her previously. And one of the things that I initially, I guess, became concerned about, and Angel Riley worked with me then in the solicitor's office. She worked for me. She's not here today. She's a member of Jeanne's unit now. I asked her about the elder abuse numbers in the county because it was something that I had heard about, and it was something that I wanted. There was this novel concept of elder abuse, and I say that tongue in cheek because there's nothing novel about it. It's been going on, but to me, at least at that point, it was. One of the things that I discovered that the DeKalb Solicitor's Office at that point prosecuted probably about 12 or 13,000 misdemeanors a year. And in the last, I think Angel gave me the statistics, in the last 6 years, they had only seen, working along with the DA's office as well, about 10 or 12 real cases of elder abuse. You know, and that would lead an individual to one or two separate conclusions. The first conclusion is that, well, you know, DeKalb County's fine. Nobody's abusing elders in DeKalb County in the metro area. The other conclusion, which frankly is the one that I arrived at, was that our system is inadequate to sniff these things out, to identify these things, and there are senior citizens amongst us that are suffering in silence. And so at that point, I realized that it wouldn't do us any good as a justice system, as a governmental system, for me to say, okay, well, let's just throw some money at it and hire some more prosecutors, and the police department can hire some more police officers, and everything's just going to be fine. We have to build a system up, a structural network, and I'm going to tell you what we've done in a second. A structural network so the prosecutors are working with the social workers are working with people on the state level, the people on the state level are working with all the local police departments, the local police departments are working with people at the personal care homes and the nursing homes, and that's the only way we find out when elders or senior citizens, for the most part, have become victims of these crimes. Because anybody that's worked with this population understands that they're very proud. My background is that of a child abuse prosecutor. That's what I did before I ran for office the first time. And I initially had this concept, like it is with children, when a child gets abused, you know, they tell mommy, they tell daddy, they tell the school teacher, and they don't have that sense of pride for the most part if it's a small child, and someone does something about it, and we've got this wonderful system that's built out. Well, with senior citizens and, you know, elders, oftentimes you have an elder that is abused, neglected, or in many instances financially exploited, and they're so ashamed of what has happened to them, they don't go and tell someone like Jeanne or someone like the police department that's here or Pat or someone like that. They don't want to tell. They don't want anyone to know. And so what I realized was that our system was inadequate to uncover these crimes. And so we got to work. Myself, Pat, Jeanne, several other people here, we sat down and we started talking about how do we improve our local system so that we can identify elder abuse. And we did something real simple. Nothing ingenious. We decided that we would talk every month. Wow, government talking to one another. Like that's I know that's a novel concept, but that's what we did. We created something called a multidisciplinary team. And every month we decided that we would talk about the cases that we had. And it was amazing. It was revolutionary what happened when the prosecutor started talking to the police department, and the police department and the prosecutor started talking to social workers. And we start talking to adult protective services, and we start talking to people that are over the extended stay homes and the nursing homes and things of that nature. All of a sudden, we started learning about these problems and learning about the deficiencies in our system, and we start learning about things that needed to be fixed both on the law enforcement side, the prosecutor side, and the social service side that we had been going on for 100 years and didn't even know about, just talking. And from this, I can tell you, and I'm not going to tell you about all the different things that we've done because a lot of programs have come out of this, but I really want to get Jeanne up here. But from this, something amazing happened. We went from that 12 or 13 cases to now we have several hundred cases that are coming through our office. Several hundred cases. Now, most people want to clap their hands and celebrate about that, and there's nothing to celebrate about. But it is an important first step because at least now we are beginning to identify the people that are victims of elder abuse and they are no longer suffering in silence. And so now I can go to the county commission or I can have my grant writer write a grant and we can get more prosecutors, we can get more investigators because we actually have cases to work. And when we have cases to work, what does that mean? It means that the people are beginning to get the protection that they need. And that's what's wonderful about what we're doing in DeKalb County and what we have done. And I just want to welcome everybody. Again, I wish that this auditorium is full because there's going to be several things that are said that people need to hear, but we'll talk to who's here. And so thank you for coming.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and police officers and people from public health. It's wonderful to see you all here. I'm here today to talk about elder exploitation specifically. There are 3 different ways that our elder citizens are taken advantage of. There's physical abuse, there's neglect, and there's financial exploitation. We see a lot of financial exploitation. That's what I'm going to talk about today. One thing I would disagree with Robert about, and I hate to say it, is he says people aren't getting worse. Well, sometimes I read these cases and I think people are getting worse. You know, I'm getting mad, and I tried a case last week I'll tell you a little bit about, but we have a perfect storm. We have, the statistics are showing the obvious. The baby boomers are aging, okay? And so when you look at some of the numbers, and I'm only going to put up a few numbers, I want to talk about cases. You see that the baby boomers starting this year are turning 65 every 10 seconds, you know, 1 every 10 seconds. And this is going to go on for 20 years. Essentially, the elder population is about to double. All right, so that's a new pool of victims. And that's unfortunately the way these bad people are looking at it. And these numbers are pretty startling. The number of people over the age of 85 has increased 635%. But more importantly, we're going to have an elder population that's going to triple to 70 million people in a very short time. Now, why is elder exploitation increasing? Number one is what we just looked at. The numbers are increasing. So we have a huge pool of targets. But also, it's very important to realize, you may have read in the paper about how nurses are needed and that this is the number one field that they're going to need more people to go into. And specifically, home care. Why? Because elder people do not want to leave their homes, not until they absolutely have to. And so more and more people are coming into the homes to help them stay there, to help them be independent. And many of them are dedicated professionals. But unfortunately, many of them are not. And what do they have in the home that they would not have in a hospital? Or if the elder person, they ran into them in some kind of a day center, a senior center, well, they've got their checkbooks, they've got all of their information. And when the elder person lies down to take a nap, they can go through those records at their own speed, and they do. And so what we have is, that is the numbers, and then the fact that more and more people are coming into their homes and have access to those the financial records. And finally, the fact that the wealth of this country is not solely in our elder population, but our elder population came from a saving generation. They came from an era where you put money aside every week or out of every paycheck. You invested in mutual funds. I know that's what my parents always just did, just put it in mutual funds. And it builds up over time. But more importantly, they're all getting a check every month. They don't have to go to work to get a check. It's coming to them. The recession doesn't affect that. So all the people out there who aren't working and aren't trying very hard to get a job are looking at the wealth that's coming in, that these checks are coming in to our seniors, and they're targeting that. Now, why are elders vulnerable? Some of this is obvious, but number one is isolation, and that has to do with these people that want to stay in their homes, but their mobility is getting more and more limited. And so they are sitting there, they're not going to church as much as they used to, they're not going to the store as much as they used to, they may be getting Meals on Wheels brought to the home, so they're not interacting with their neighbors as much as they used to. And very often what you have, especially if a family member is the one doing the exploiting, is they'll start discouraging people from coming to visit. No, she's not doing well this week, don't come this week, not answering the phone, isolating them on purpose. It's the same thing that batterers do in domestic violence situations, except these elder people can't always just get up, get in the car, and go see a friend. They are limited by their physical ability. Loneliness is very important because so many of our cases where the exploiters are actually the kind that are the smooth talkers, the con men, the con women, they will talk to these people like nobody else does. Unfortunately, some people who've lost their best friends, they've lost their spouse, other people, they've outlived most of the people that they cared about and who cared about them. Someone calls up and wants to talk to them and ask them questions about their grandchildren, and they're just so delighted. And what you'll hear in a lot of cases of telemarketing fraud is that they're sad when the person is caught and put in jail because they miss them. They actually miss them. And so that loneliness is something you really can't underestimate. The loss of mental acuity, it's important to realize, everyone talks about senior moments. Not every elder person loses their mental acuity. Not every elder person has dementia. And what an elder person is somebody over the age of 65. We all know not everyone over the age of 65 has dementia, about 4%, and it sort of goes up from there. But some of them do. And when you get up to people that are 85 and older, 43% of them are suffering from Alzheimer's disease to some extent. And so the numbers obviously grow as the age increases. And that is a key reason why they are targeted. They're a polite generation. I saw that in the case that I just tried last week, and I will talk about that, but they don't hang up on people. They don't say, I'm not talking to you, I'm not answering your questions, I'm not going to give you any money, and click. No, they're not raised that way. If someone comes to the door, they're going to talk to them. And I would tell them, close the door, hang up the phone, but they don't want to listen. That's not the way they were raised. And finally, they're very reluctant to report the crime, sometimes because they're afraid of their abuser or their exploiter. But very often it's because they don't want to lose their number one thing they care about, staying in their home, being independent. Their loss of independence is what leads them to be afraid to tell people that they've been taken advantage of, because then they might think that they can't take care of themselves and they may have to go someplace else, and they just want to stay in their homes. Alzheimer's disease, all I want to point out is there's a lot of people don't understand that it's really just the most common form of dementia. It's not an either-or situation, and that people over 85 have a greatly increased risk, more women than men. And look at that number, 7.7 million people will have it in 2030. Now, who's exploiting the elderly? This is my own distinction. I came up with this, and that is I see people that are opportunists, and I see predators. Okay, the predators are the professional con men, the travelers, the telemarketing fraudsters. That's all they do. And these are the bad people. These are people with no conscience. These are people that will spend 15, 20 minutes, an hour talking to an elderly person, pretending to be their friend as they proceed to steal their life savings. But just about as many, probably 50-50, just about as many are opportunists. Family members or caregivers that just see this easy mark and take it and go for it, okay? So I'm going to give you an example here. A predator, this is the case I told you about. Last week we tried a woman named Santee Roberts, and she drove around in the metro Atlanta area with 2 other people. In the back of the car was this phone book. Now, when the police pulled her over finally, after months and months of ripping people off, they saw this phone book and they thought, that's unusual. Nobody really uses phone books anymore. Well, that's because they were using this to identify elder people. How are they doing that? There's no ages in the phone book, right? But there are names in the phone book. And the people that they were calling, when I wrote up my indictment, and there were 86 victims in DeKalb County alone, when I wrote up that indictment, I started realizing this is what they were doing. Ophelia, Etta Mae, Pearlie, Gertrude, Mildred. That's how they're doing it. They're simply going through the book and calling all the old names. And they're very successful at it. Of 86 victims in DeKalb County, only 4 of them were not over the age of 65. So it's a really good system. And what you see right here is when they get a live one and they get information from them, they just write it right there in the phone book. It's a brilliant piece of evidence. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. But what did they do? First, they went out and got a phone at Metro PCS. And Metro PCS doesn't ask for ID. It's a cash-only business. You pay in advance for 30 days of service. And you could say your name is Humpty Dumpty, and they say, that's no problem, Humpty Dumpty. Well, she said her name was Georgia Powers. And then when she called these elderly people, in the summer months in Atlanta, she says, I'm with Georgia Power, and your bill has not been paid, and you're about to be cut off tomorrow morning. And these people panicked. And they had all different reasons for that. And I made sure that I asked them why they panicked so the jury would understand. So they would understand what these women were going through. One woman, her husband was dying in the house, and she was caring for him 24 hours a day. And she thought if the electricity gets cut off, and it was July 4th when they called her, if the electricity gets cut off and he's in that back bedroom, he might just die of the heat. She just forgot everything she ever knew and did something that she described as something very stupid. She pulled out her credit card and she gave them the number over the phone. That wasn't good enough for them because what we were able to prove is they then called her credit card company and tried desperately to get a PIN number so that with the PIN number they could get money out of that credit card. They didn't succeed. We showed all the phone calls and they knew all of her information because she had given it all to them. Her social security number, her mother's maiden name, all of that. But they still did not succeed in getting a PIN number. So they call her back, and now it's about 11 o'clock at night. And this poor woman who cares for her husband 24 hours a day is needing to be in bed, but she's answering the phone because they're telling her, that didn't work, I'm afraid we're going to be cutting off your electricity, and so we're going to do you a special senior service. Okay, so when Robert says people aren't getting worse, I'm like, yes, they are, okay? Special senior service that we're going to provide for you because you're such a good Christian woman. We're going to come to your mailbox and take that card out for you. So they did. They came and got the credit card, and they drove 1.9 miles away to a quick trip store, and they bought corn dogs and cigarettes and gift cards. And when the guy at the counter says, "I'm going to need some ID," Santee Roberts says, "ID? Who has a name like Edwina? Who else has a name like Edwina?" I love that QT has actual audio on their surveillance. It was just the most brilliant thing. So she was convicted, and she'll be sentenced next week. 86 people were called in DeKalb County, almost 200 in the metro area. And when you look at the Metro PCS phone records, you see that they're calling these people at 1 in the morning, 11 o'clock at night. So even elderly people who don't have dementia, they might not be as quick as the rest of us at 1 in the morning when the phone call comes in to kind of snap out of it and wake up. And that's what they told us. You know, in the morning I said, "What did I do? Why did I give that person all that information?" Because you were called at 1 in the morning and you were told you're about to lose your electricity. One woman says, "Well, I'm legally blind. I didn't know what I would do if the lights went out." And so she's preying on their vulnerability. And she's not alone, okay? This is what people do. And so what I want to do is, I actually could talk about this all day, and I should move on. There are so many different ways that people are targeting the elderly, and I want to go through them. Opportunists. This is just a perfect example of an elderly woman herself who took her brother, who's a little bit older than her and suffering from Alzheimer's, and she thought she might like to spend his Social Security check because she was having a hard time making ends meet. So she stuck him in this house. And there's a dog in the house, that's why there's a bowl up there. And it got quickly just kind of unbearable for her, so she just put a padlock on the outside of the door, and she went and lived somewhere else. And this is what the police found when they came, because there was a neighbor who said, "I think there's an elderly gentleman in that house, but I'm not sure, but I'm hearing some yelling coming from the house." It was him saying, "Help, help." He has a very bad memory. He's suffering from moderate Alzheimer's, and he's locked down in there in that basement with the dog who never goes outside. So use your imagination about the conditions in that house. Why? She wants to spend his check. That's an opportunist, you know. She's probably not going to go out and find another elderly person and do that to them, but she's treating her own flesh and blood like this. All right, Georgia law. This is just simply to tell you what the Georgia law is, and I'm going to go through it rather quickly. But you cannot abuse, neglect, or exploit elder persons or disabled adults, anyone over the age of 18 who is mentally or physically incapacitated. And there's also special code provisions for other things like theft and aggravated assault. What is exploitation? The illegal or improper use of a disabled adult or elder person or that person's resources. So that's the statute that we use. And I know there's some people here that hear from the Decatur Police Department, and they use this statute, and we converse all the time about what's the best charge. This charge is a good one, and it really helps us to combat some of these people that are doing these things. These people, all the people on this list, are mandatory reporters. They must report to law enforcement or to Adult Protective Services if they suspect that an elder or disabled person is being abused, neglected, or exploited. And I love the fact that bank personnel are on this list because some of the most outrageous things happen at banks, and sometimes you just look at the people at the bank and say, "How come you didn't do something?" And you'll see some of that in a minute. One of the things that we have to battle is the idea that these are civil matters. An elder person might give a power of attorney to somebody that they trust, usually mistakenly in these cases, and they say, "Why don't you help me with my finances? This gives you the power to make decisions for me." Well, when that person rips off the elder person and steals their resources and uses their identity and gets credit cards and goes on trips, lots of times people in the community and legal people and judges and prosecutors and police will say, "Well, no, that's a civil matter. You know, this is about him and the power of attorney," and it's not a civil matter at all. A power of attorney does not give you a license to steal. It does not. And we have prosecuted people with power of attorneys, and in my view, and I will tell a jury this, they're worse. That elder person trusted you. That elder person said, "Help me," and you helped yourself. That's worse. And so it's not a civil matter. Undue influence. This is a situation where if we didn't have that statute I just showed you, there would be all these situations where an elder person gives money to somebody and nobody's stealing it from them, and there's no forgery involved because they're signing the check, but they're not giving it to them because they want them to have it. It's not really a freely given gift. They're being a victim of undue influence. They're being lied to. And these are things that might not fit into the normal theft statutes or forgery statutes, but they fit right into elder exploitation. And one case that I tried was a woman who was a longtime caregiver for the woman that she cared for. She was in her 80s. And this woman, I'm forgetting her name, so I'm going to call her Hope. She actually kept putting checks in front of this poor woman she can't even sit up straight, because when I went to see her, she kept leaning over and I kept kind of having to push her back up. I was afraid she was going to fall out of her chair. She was so frail. And Hope would put down the checks and say, you need to give me some more money because I'm going to have to leave and not work for you anymore if I don't get some more money. And you'll end up in a nursing home. And she signed the checks. She signed every one of those checks. And Hope spent her money, her life savings, on lottery tickets. And a neighbor one day came in and saw the kitchen table littered with lottery tickets. I believe that Hope actually had a lot of caring for the woman she was caring for. And she was hoping to strike it big so she could put all that money back in the bank. She never did, and the money was gone. That's undue influence. It's not theft and it's not forgery, but it fits right into it. That's elder exploitation. Home repair fraud, this is important because prosecutors, we never want to touch these cases where someone hires a contractor to do a job and then they're not happy with the job and they call us up and this is highway robbery, or the contractor stole my money because I was supposed to get Italian marble and I don't think this is Italian, that sort of thing. We don't go there, okay, because that is a civil matter. But people who ride around in pickup trucks and knock on the door of an elder person and say, I'm going to fix your roof, I see a loose shingle, okay? I'm just going to run up there and fix it for you. And then they come down an hour later and say, that'll be $8,000. That's an Irish traveler, or that's a traveler. It's not really just Irish. They're from Eastern Europe. They're from all over the place. But that's what we call them, traveling con men. And we prosecuted someone like that who had been arrested in 8 different states. 8 different states, but he'd never been convicted. When you read between the lines of the criminal history, you know what happened. Every time he was arrested for home repair fraud against an elder person, he'd pay it off. Let me give the money back. And the elder person was very happy to have their money back, and the prosecutor let the case go. When I realized this guy had been arrested 8 times in 8 different states and he'd never been convicted, I made sure that this time he was going to be convicted. He paid the victims back, and then I made sure he was convicted, because somebody's got to do it. These people are doing this all the time. When you think about the fact that he's been arrested in 8 different states, how many times has he gotten away with it? He drives off in his pickup truck, and nobody ever knows even who he was. So that is all this man does. And those are the kind of cases where we say, no, 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 that is not a civil matter. That is a professional liar, a professional thief who preys on the elderly. How do we try one? Quickly. What's important to realize is that the criminal justice system grinds along pretty slowly. There's a lot of cases in the system, but these elder people can't wait, okay? We need to get these cases addressed very quickly, because they could fall down and break their hip. They could end up getting a urinary tract infection, go into the hospital, develop dementia, and pass away very quickly. They could have a stroke or a heart attack, or they could develop dementia to the point where they can no longer testify a year or 18 months later, because that's how long it can take, or even longer. And then they say, I don't remember why I gave her that money. I don't recall. And so we have to move quickly, and the system really isn't built for that. So one of the things we're trying to do is to get people recorded, whether it's a deposition or a hearing. We need to get them on the stand. We need to get them cross-examined. So if they're not there for the trial, we can still go forward. And of course, with restitution payments, it can't be like, oh, pay this out over 20 years when our victim is already in her 80s. Okay, we want that money, we want it up front if we can possibly get it. And if necessary, if the elder person needs that money, we'll cut the sentence to get them that money if they need it up front, because they don't have 20 years to wait. One of the things we're looking at is when we can't get the elder person to court, we'll take the court to them. In this one particular case that we had, we couldn't bring the defendant to the nursing home, which we do depositions in the nursing home all the time. We couldn't bring them there because they were in jail. So you don't just bring inmates into a nursing home along with armed guards. You just can't do it. They usually, in the nursing homes, they'll give you a little conference room, which is probably big enough for 4 people. It just won't work. So we actually had an argument with the judge, and the judge ruled that we could do that deposition by Skype. And we believe that's the first time that's happened in Georgia, but I think it's something we're going to have to look at more and more often in order to enable us to do what we need to do to help these elderly victims. Competency, you might think, well, how do you put someone with dementia on the stand? Well, the law says that all witnesses are competent unless proven otherwise. They're presumed to be competent. And Alzheimer's, for example, has all different ranges. There's mild, moderate, severe. Nobody with severe Alzheimer's belongs in a courtroom, okay? They can't sit up or talk. But someone with mild Alzheimer's, they can get on the stand. They can do the best that they can do to testify about the events. And what they're going to have is really bad short-term memory, but pretty good long-term memory. So we put them up and we see how much they're able to remember. It's not impossible to do, but we put them up in the morning because they're sharper in the morning. And if anyone knows anyone who has memory issues, who has an older person in their life, very often we'll be told by the family members they're sharpest at 9, so put them on the stand first thing. Case examples. This is a case of a professional caregiver. I focus a lot on professional caregivers because someone who's in the business of caring for the elderly needs to be convicted, needs to be prohibited from working with the elderly again. And this is a perfect example. Roxana Burton was his caregiver, our victim. And that's an example of the kind of hearings that we do. This man was 89 years old. And so we went ahead and did a deposition long in advance of trial because we weren't quite sure if he would still be available for trial. And these are all the checks that she wrote while he was sleeping. She'd pull these checks out, and she started low, $2,000, $1,800. She just forged his name, and these checks went right through the bank, and nobody noticed. But then he got a big payment from one of his investments, and he was going to reinvest the money, but for a short time, that money's in his account. Look at those last 2 checks, $40,000 and $80,000. She actually got those checks negotiated. And the bank allowed it to happen, didn't set off any red flags, and then, so that's a total of $208,000 that she wrote on his account. And he and she were very close. This was very, very upsetting to him. What you saw was him on the deposition with his head in his hands, saying, I really thought she cared about me. That's a devastation he'll never get over. Now, we were able to find $99,000 in her account. The police froze it, and at the end of the trial, we were able to give it back to him, but not the rest of it. And you might ask yourself, well, what about the bank? You know, this is fraud. It's forgery, right? They should reimburse him. They said no. They would not reimburse him because it started back in September, and he didn't notice. And the bank will say, if you don't discover a fraud within 30 or 60 days, you're out of luck. You're not going to get reimbursed. And far too many elderly people do not check their statements every single month. And that's what I tell them. Anytime I talk to a group of elderly people, check your credit card statements and your bank statements every month, because they will put the money back in your account, or they will not hold you responsible for the credit card charges. But if you don't notice it, they will. Now, in this case, our victim was unable to get down the 3 steps that it took to get to his mailbox. Roxana Burton was happy to get the mail for him. And I see that so often. So she's picking up his mail, she's pocketing his bank statement, and he doesn't know until he can't afford medication because his bank account is so low. That's when he finds out he's been wiped out. In that case, we were ready to go to trial, and we wheeled in our victim, and he was wearing his best lime green checked jacket, and as we wheeled him in, she turned to her lawyer and says, "I'll plead guilty." So that's how that went. This is one of those travelers I told you about, Mr. Nicholas Marks, although not his real name. He has a different name depending on what state he's in, okay, this man. And this is a romance scam. He goes to the Colonnade really early, okay, it's on Cheshire Bridge Road. I mean, we're talking about 4:30 p.m., and that's where our victim was, poor Mr. Stewart, 89 years old. And he, Mr. Marks, says, "Come and sit with me and my niece." And his niece is about 50. And they talk all night. And we actually brought in the maitre d' from the Colonnade restaurant because he remembered this. He said, "Mr. Stewart came in by himself all the time. Remember what I talked about? Loneliness, right? He came in by himself all the time, and he was so pleased to be invited over to share their table." Within no time, he's engaged to marry this niece, who we never found. And if it wasn't for his bank, he never would have been caught. So here's what happened. And it's interesting because this is what we used at the trial. February 10th is when they met at the Colonnade. This whole thing ended 1 month later. In that 1 month, Mr. Marks was able to isolate Mr. Stewart from his daughter and from his very close friend, Ms. Barnett. Ms. Barnett had a power of attorney to help him, and she had never abused it. Well, that got revoked very quickly, and then suddenly there's a TPO against her because she's physically abusing Mr. Stewart. That was simply not true. So now she's not allowed to even come to the house. Then Mr. Stewart buys a $13,000 engagement ring for his fiancée, $35,000 car, and changes his will to put her in the will. And there's all sorts of other things. Now there's a quitclaim deed on his house. He lived on North Druid Hills Road, right near Toco Hills. His house was worth about $400,000, and there was no mortgage on it. Suddenly, this guy, Mr. Marks, has a quitclaim deed to his house. MoneyGram's takes out all the money out of his account, and then he goes to the bank. Mr. Stewart goes to the bank, and he is alone at this point. And he says to his bankers, who have known him for years, "I need a certified check for $10,000. And they said, "Well, why do you need that?" And he says, "I just need it. I need it right now. I need it right now." And he was very nervous, and he was very upset. And this is where I credit those people at the bank. They knew something was wrong. That's not the way he was. Mr. Stewart loved to sit and chat about his cat. He would do that for as long as people would listen, and he was very, very nervous and abrupt with these people. So they said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Stewart, we're out of checks," which I just love. And that's called going out on a limb to help your customer. He comes back in probably about 20 minutes later with Mr. Marks, and Mr. Marks is all puffed up and angry. "What do you mean you're out of checks? What are you talking about?" And he says he's an attorney. And that's what they finally got a warrant for him for impersonating an attorney, which is a misdemeanor. But when he was arrested for impersonating an attorney, they found that quitclaim deed in his briefcase. They found the will where he had put everything in Mr. Stewart's possession into his niece's name, and the car deed, all of that stuff, all in 1 month. 1 month. So in this case, thanks to the bank, he's arrested for a misdemeanor. We promptly added a bunch more charges, and we got ready for trial, and then Mr. Stewart just died very suddenly, 89 years old. So the trial's in about a month. I get a phone call from Ms. Barnett. "I think he's dead, he's cold." It's just a horrible moment. But we had Mr. Stewart's testimony recorded, and we were able to try the case without him. And we were able to lock up Mr. Marks for 15 years. That's what we can try to do when we focus, and this is what Mr. James was talking about. A normal DA's office, a normal DA with 150 cases, isn't going to be able to do what we were able to do in this case, which is move it along, get his testimony recorded, investigate all those things that were happening in that short period of time, and then try the case anyway. One of my favorite moments in this whole sad story is when the defense attorney said to me on the morning of trial, "Well, I assume you're not trying this case. Your victim's deceased." And I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And we proceeded to pick a jury. I was delighted to be able to represent Mr. Stewart despite the fact that he was already passed away. I wasn't just representing him, I was representing all the people that would be victimized if I didn't convict Mr. Marks. Rest assured, he was going to go to another state, pick a new name, and do it all over again. That's all he does. Home repair fraud, I told you about Mr. Eddington. What I didn't tell you is he's the one who said, I'm going to fix that shingle on your roof, and then he insisted on an $8,000 payment. There were two victims. The other one paid him $1,800, okay? What's important about that is when he was arrested, that book of invoices was in his truck. And what we wanted to do is to show that he was targeting elder persons and not just doing roofing work. And so what we did is we took this little bit of information, which is really just a name and an address. That's it. And one of our investigators went through that book and looked up all those people on the Lexis People Search and found out their dates of birth. What we discovered is when he said through his lawyer, I don't target the elderly, I'm just a roofer, I don't know what you're talking about, we were able to prove that the average age of his customers was 84.9 years old. That kind of research enabled us to show the judge this is not just a roofing situation. This is not just a customer who's not happy with the price. This is a pattern. And he was the one who had been arrested over and over in all those different states. This is Harry Coggins. Harry and Belinda. They were taking care of Belinda's mom, who was 80 years old, and she said to them, I'd like you to hold on to my money for me. And so she went to the bank with them. She wanted them to hold on to it because she wasn't quite sure it was safe in the bank. And that's rich because this is Harry. He says, and he testified, that he went to the bank with Lucille, that Lucille handed him that check, and he said he looked at the check and he said, damn, Mama, $80,000, thanks. And it was understood that this was for safekeeping, but they promptly bought a truck, a car, and a barn and spent all of that money. That's the beginning of the story. Lucille asked for the money back, and Belinda's alone in her kitchen, and she realizes, I don't have that money, I spent it. So she picks up a frying pan, and she hits herself in the face with it. Then she drives to Cobb County, and she gets out of the car at a gas station, and she said, a masked man with Japanese tattoos just pistol whipped me and stole my $80,000. And the Cobb County police are like, come again? Like, what? Why did you have $80,000? Why did you stop at this gas station with a bag full of $80,000? How did the man with the Japanese tattoos know you had $80,000? She really couldn't answer any of those questions. What it came down to is she made the false report of an armed robbery in order to hide the fact that she had spent every dime of her mother's money. And at trial, and I told you, it just keeps getting more interesting, the key witness for Belinda and Harry was Lucille. She came in and testified that she wanted them to have that money, that it was a gift, because she didn't want us to convict Belinda and Harry. Why? They had moved Lucille into their house. And so she felt like that was the only way that she could be safe and live in the community was with Belinda and Harry. What we were able to do with the help of the Adult Protective Services is find another relative who could take care of her while Belinda and Harry were serving their prison sentence. And she's doing quite well without them. But that is a perfect example of undue influence. Let me help you out. Let me hold that money for you. And then they go out and they go on the shopping spree of all time. Sweepstakes scams. This is a group that we prosecuted. 11 people holed up in a little office in DeKalb County. They're calling people all day long. And these are people that are all elderly. You can buy a phone list of elderly people from unscrupulous companies. And that's what they were doing. Every single one of those people, amazingly, was a finalist for a $50,000 prize. Now they're talking, there's only 10 finalists, but they're talking to thousands of people, and all of them are a top 10 finalists for a $50,000 prize. Now, in order to get this prize, which is offered by major banks, you need to give us your bank account number so we can deposit the money into your account. Oh, and by the way, give us that routing number on your checkbook, and just for your security, give us your mother's maiden name, your date of birth, and your social security number. They go into the account and they take the money out. This is a legitimate business. What they were saying is, well, we sell magazines and we do subscribe to a sweepstakes. It's out there somewhere. And there is a $50,000 prize. But what we were able to prove is they're telling everyone that they're a top 10 winner, and they're talking to hundreds of people in one day, so they can't be top 10 winners. And the prize is pulled every 6 months. So it's more like a mathematical thing. If you're in that room, you know that you're lying to people. You know it. And then you hear the guy, Rico, he's the manager of the office. He's getting on the phone, and he's literally pretending to be a little old lady. And he's actually putting a quaver into his voice. It's outrageous. And he accidentally tape recorded himself doing this. And when I was listening to hours and hours of these phone calls, I suddenly hear Rico going, "Hello, this is Louise," whatever. "And I want to take some money out of my account." And I'm like, oh my God, he recorded this by mistake. And what happened is they all pled guilty on the morning of trial because those tapes were so priceless. And this is what I was talking about. These people would get on the phone with them. And the poor women, I remember one in particular, she said, "Oh, thank goodness I won a sweepstakes. My roof has been leaking for the longest time. My daddy built this house, and now I can finally fix the roof and maybe buy some presents for my grandkids. I can never buy them presents for Christmas because I don't have enough money." And this woman on the other end of the phone, she called herself Crystal, not her real name. "Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you. God has blessed you. This is a wonderful day. Oh, those kids are going to be so happy with those presents." I mean, outrageous behavior. So in the end, they decided, Crystal and Rico and the rest of them decided they didn't want the jury to hear that evidence. They didn't want to sit there and listen to themselves. I think it would have been as excruciating for them as it was for me listening to it in the room, maybe more. And they ended up pleading guilty. But these sweepstakes scams happen all the time. I got an email today from a woman who said her father had sent $100,000 to Miami because he had won a sweepstakes. And the lies are always different. I'm going to deposit the money into your account, or there's taxes that have to be paid on the winnings, and so you just have to pay the taxes in advance. Whatever the lie is, you end up sending money to the person you've won a sweepstakes from, and you never see it again. Caregiver abuse, another case of this. This one's really outrageous. This is her, Felicia Harvey, at the bank. I love that all of our bank surveillance photos, she's wearing her nurse's uniform. She takes care of this woman who was in great shape, 98 years old, but she walked every day. She was on top of the world. But shortly after Ms. Harvey starts working for her, she becomes bedridden. What does that mean? It means she can't walk to the mailbox downstairs. She can't get downstairs. She can't get her mail. Ms. Harvey will pick it up for her, including her bank statements. Ms. Harvey was paying her own utility bills through the bank account, writing herself checks to the total of almost $100,000. And then she gets caught because she missed one day of work. And on the day she missed work, the bank statement came in. And the bank statement the daughter looks at the bank statement and says, "What's this?" Now, meanwhile, our victim is lying in bed. She hasn't gotten out of bed for a couple of months. The family says, well, she's 98. I guess this is it. That's what they think. What happens is, after she is fired for stealing all that money, our victim makes a miraculous recovery. She's doing fine. She's doing great. So what we did is we looked at her pharmacy records, and we found something absolutely amazing. This is Alprazolam, is an anti-anxiety medication that her doctor said she should use to help her sleep. And she used it, and we went back and looked at her pattern. She used about 6 pills a month when she couldn't sleep. During the time that Felicia Harvey worked for her, she went through 50 pills a month. That's how much more of the prescription she was getting. And I asked the doctor, well, how do you allow this? I mean, isn't there a limit on the prescription? And he said, well, she's been taking these pills for so long, I had no concern that she would abuse them, and it just never was a problem before. It was never a problem until Felicia Harvey started caring for her and doping her up until she was lying in bed, practically dead. And the amazing thing is that she bounced back from that, physically. But that poor victim sobbed and sobbed about how she was taken advantage of. And she told me that she would die if she had to get up and testify about how she was taken advantage of. That's how much emotionally, that's how much of a toll this took on her. And of course, she never got her money back because she didn't discover the crime, because Felicia Harvey was pocketing the bank statements. So that money's just gone. And that woman since has passed away. I can tell you that I've seen how much she suffered in the last 2 years of her life, and that is an absolute crying shame that is how she spent the last 2 years of her life, that is what was done to her by Felicia Harvey. Ms. Harvey is in prison. Power of attorney theft, I told you about the fact that we have Timothy Ware is this particular guy, but people do this all the time. They're helping their godfather, their uncle, their grandfather with his finances. He needs some help. And then Mr. Ware just opened up a bunch of credit cards. And the police said to him, well, why did you open all these American Express cards and all these other cards in his name? And he said, well, I thought he could really use the help with his credit. You know, you need to get credit cards to get good credit. Well, our victim was 89 years old, and he really didn't need any help with his credit. Plus, Mr. Ware then went off to Vegas and took a lot of trips and paid for it all with those credit cards. Now, this is one of those cases where the defense attorney came to me and said, what are you doing? This is a civil matter. This is between him and his financial advisor. And I said, you tell that to the jury that this is a civil matter. Mr. Ware took advantage of the victim when he was in the hospital. He also, while he was in the hospital with a raging infection, and he was seeing people that weren't there, and he was shaking around a glass of scotch that wasn't in his hand. When that was going on, Mr. Ware said, oh, sign this. It's only a quitclaim deed to the victim's home, and the victim had to go to a rehabilitation center after his hospitalization. By the time he got out, that house had been sold, and Mr. Ware had pocketed the $200,000. Again, no mortgage on the house, so nothing stopped him from selling it. But he was a power of attorney, so that made it a civil matter. No, it does not. This is so outrageous. It was a case that we had back last year. We thought we were going to try it, but on the morning of trial, Ms. Faust decided to enter a guilty plea, and she received a sentence of 20 years to serve 10 years. What she did is she picked up this man at a homeless shelter and said, how'd you like to come live at my house? And this man says, well, I've lived in a lot of crappy places. The shelter's not any great shakes. I'll come check it out. And he comes and he looks at the room in her basement, which is spacious and has windows. And she says, I'll help you if you need to come upstairs and use the restroom and take a shower. And he says, okay, it's all right, I'll stay there. And he agrees to pay her $500 a month. Shortly after that, there's a really bad string of storms. You might recall in Cobb County, all those houses were flooded. Well, the basement got flooded. And he said, I'm not staying here anymore. These conditions are appalling. And so she took away his walker, and she pushed him into an inner room, which was 12 feet by 18 feet, no windows, no bathroom, no running water. And she kept him there for 5 months. Meanwhile, his checks are coming in because he had changed his address to her address, and she's spending his money. Now, that sounds so outrageous that you might even wonder if it's true. And that's what happened when he finally broke through the 3 locks that were in between him and the outside world. He breaks through those 3 locks, and he starts walking down the street, and he looks exactly like this, because this is the picture that was taken. He did not weigh that little 5 months earlier. Okay? he starts walking down the street and he flags down this police officer. And she's like, what's your deal? What are you doing in this neighborhood, and who are you? Because it's a pretty nice neighborhood. It's a bunch of ranch houses. People keep their yards nice. And he does not belong. Why is he wandering down the street? And he says, I've been held hostage for 5 months in this woman's basement. And she goes, that might be true. And then again, it might not. You could be crazy. But she was good enough. She was diligent enough to put him in the patrol car, drive him around, and say, why don't you just show me the house? And it actually took him a little while because he'd been in the basement for so long. He didn't know what the address was, but he finally saw the house, and he says, I think that's it. And she pulls up, and she says, wait in the car. And she goes up to the house. And this is, I forgot to tell you, there are 2 men in that tiny room with no running water and no windows that measures 12 feet by 18 feet. 2 men. There's this man who is there against his will, and then there's a man named Benjamin Wheeler who has schizophrenia and doesn't know any better and thinks that living in that room is just fine. Well, the police officer goes up to the house and runs into Benjamin Wheeler and says, I just have a question for you. Can you tell me who stays in this house? And Benjamin Wheeler says, well, me and this other dude, but he busted out this morning. And the officer goes, oh my God, it's true. And then she did the smartest thing in the world. She backed away and called for a detective and a crime scene. Thank goodness. And they were able to take photographs, get a search warrant, and do it right. And this is a picture of the room that Mr. Hill spent 5 months in. That's his bathroom over there in the corner. Well, they each had their own buckets, so, you know, that's pretty good amenities, right? Every morning, Mr. Wheeler's job was to empty out the buckets. You think this doesn't happen. You think it can't happen, but it did, and it does. Those are their beds. They did have cable TV. Just like in jail, it keeps people occupied, right? And it's a little tiny television set with the cable coming down from the upstairs. I thought that was a nice touch. Well, here's what happens. Ms. Faust drives home in her, I think it's a Lincoln SUV, nice car. And the police officer says, I need to talk to you. This gentleman says he's been locked in your basement for 5 months. And she goes, oh my goodness, I can't believe he would say that. He's a homeless man. And he asked me if I would be kind enough to take him in. And I did. And I didn't know he went to the basement. I gave him a bed to sleep in. And I don't know what he's talking about. And so the detective goes back to our victim and says, she says you were just there for 1 night. What do you say to that? And he says, I knew that she would lie about this. I've known it all along. I thought I was going to die in that room. And so I've been pulling my hair out of my head every day. And I've been balling it up, and I stuck it under the lamp in that room because I watch CSI, and I know that this means my DNA is here, and even if I'm not here, this will prove that I was here. So again, you're thinking, wow, what a story, right? The detective picks up the lamp, and he finds that hair under the lamp. This is a case that we were really very anxious to try. We actually could not wait. And you know what? Our victim, I'm just not naming him for his own protection, but he was dying to go to trial. He was so anxious to go to trial. He wanted to tell everybody what she did to him. We didn't get that opportunity because she pled guilty. But the media called, and they were very interested in this story. And they asked me if the victim would like to talk to them. So I called him up, and I said, well, it's up to you, but they'd like to interview you about what happened to you. And it's, you know, you let me know if you want them to come over with the camera. And he says, well, now, I didn't do it for the fame. But he didn't mind so much being on TV. It was kind of a thrill for him. And I'm glad he was thrilled. I'm glad that something good came out of this for him. And so he got to be on TV, and he's leaning on his cane, and I'm glad he had that moment. That was nice. And he's in prison for 10 years. One of the things I wanted to focus on, and this is the end of the presentation, is what are we trying to do? What are we trying to do in the DA's office about all these horrible people out there, about all these horrible crimes? Well, we're trying to lock people up that are in the business of targeting the elderly, number one. The travelers, the telemarketers, the professional caregivers who rip off client after client after client. Just lock them up, because while they're locked up, they can't hurt anybody else. If we find money, and it was the police that froze the money in the Roxana Burton case, they acted so quickly. And so we were able to give back our victim some of his money, $99,000. And what happened that day is he's there, the guilty plea happens, and he's hard of hearing. So the jury is there talking to the judge, because we already picked the jury. And everyone's talking, and he's just sitting there. And the judge says, well, sir, do you have any questions about what's just happened? And he just looked out at her, and he goes, I haven't heard a word you said. And so she leans into her microphone, right? She goes, you're getting your $99,000. And he goes, I heard that. He was so happy. And then he asked me, what about the rest of it? Well, he got $99,000 back because the police acted so quickly when they figured out what she was doing, and they were able to freeze the account. And then the other thing, what we find it to be very important to do is to oppose first offender for these professional caregivers. I don't care if they're 22 years old. Now, first offender is a system, it's a treatment that you can have where you plead guilty to your first offense, and you get a chance to wipe the slate clean. And it's a good idea. People can make one mistake, and then they can turn around and do the right thing for the rest of their lives. And so very often, the judges will let people have first offender treatment for their first nonviolent offense. And very often, the prosecutors will not oppose it. When a person is a professional caregiver and in the business of helping vulnerable people like the elderly and disabled, we oppose first offender every time. We want them to be a convicted felon, and I don't care if they're 19 years old. You're in the business of helping someone, and you rip them off. Nobody should ever put their trust in you again. No agency should ever hire you. They should run your record and go, oh no, elder exploitation, this person is not going to be hired, is not going to be sent into a home by me to take advantage of another elderly person. So this is something, we make this argument with the judges, and we'll say, look, I don't care if you put him in jail or not. I don't care if she serves time or not. Please make her a convicted felon so that she can never be hired to be in a position of trust with a vulnerable adult again. We're not always successful, but we make that argument every time. We also ask that during the time they're on the sentence, under sentence, that they simply be prohibited from working with the elderly. And that if they do work with any elder person, it's a violation of their probation and they can be sent back to jail. We don't always get that either, but it's something we always try to do. What we're trying to do is to try to protect as many citizens from being victimized in the future as we possibly can. Because what we know is that the people that target the elderly and do it, they're going to keep doing it. They'll do it again and again, and we have to fight that. We have to do everything that we can to try to make the victims whole, but we also have to try to look out for our victims in the future. So, that's the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. I just realized I should mention that if any of you are planning to come back tomorrow, we have 3 speakers coming in to talk on 3 very different areas of looking at our elder exploitation issue and elder abuse. We have David Blake, who's a forensic investigation specialist, and he'll be speaking first with the Division of Aging. We also have Dr. Tom Price right here at Emory. He is a geriatric specialist. He's going to talk about the physical changes that help to make elder people vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. And finally, we'll have Judge Gerald Roche from the DeKalb County Probate Court, and she's going to come and talk about what probate court does to try to protect the elderly, and there's conservatorships and guardianships, and she is much better able than I to tell you the kind of challenges they face and what they're seeing about this problem out there in the community. So thank you very much. I hope you'll be back tomorrow.